CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliet Mann.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories.
Freedom is more important than free trade.
Conflicts on the agenda at Davos, with security and the war in Ukraine taking centre stage at the World Economic Forum.
Fighting intensifies in eastern Ukraine as Russia tries to cut off key cities. President Zelensky warns of a bloodbath.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is accused of lying again over a lockdown gathering in Downing Street for which he wasn't fined.
Volvo's Green Drive. Sweden's auto giant announces it's the first in the world to use fossil-free steel in its trucks.
And it's time for TikTok to let its creators make money from subscribers.
Russia is using food supplies as a weapon with global repercussions.
That's what European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has been telling global leaders meeting at the Swiss resort of Davos for the World Economic Forum. Well, our correspondent Ryan Thompson is in Davos. So, Ryan, we've had speeches from both Ursula von der Leyen and also NATO's Secretary General about the food crisis. What do they have to say?
Yeah, that's right, Robin. Two of Brussels' biggest hitters making their way here to the Swiss alpine town of Davos. And they've taken quite a tough tone on this looming global food crisis. Ursula von der Leyen really pointed the finger at Russia, saying that it is blackmailing much of the world into not just a fuel crisis, but also this food crisis. And she said that the food crisis is a paramount concern for the European Union. They're already feeling the effects in many member countries across the continent, but they also see that even though they're trying to mitigate the circumstances by working and engaging with the World Food Programme, by increasing supplies, they're also seeing that they're just not able to deliver on some of the promises that are needed to African or developing nations that are so reliant on exports from Europe. In pointing the finger, Ursula von der Leyen said that Russia is quite literally fueling the fire of this crisis, pointing to the fact that they have often used their airstrikes to bombard a number of grain silos, destroying those key crops and key supplies. All the while, they're continuing to block food exports along the Black Sea. So really making an already difficult situation much, much worse. Her tone ultimately said that Russia is a bad actor here in terms of the global playing field, and that they're taking deliberately negative actions to hurt many countries despite their best efforts. Take a listen.
We are witnessing how Russia is weaponizing its energy supplies. And indeed, this is having global repercussions. Unfortunately, we are seeing the same pattern emerging in food security. And on top of this, Russia is now hoarding its own food exports as a form of blackmail, holding back supplies to increase global prices or trading wheat in exchange for political support.
And Robin, Ursula von der Leyen, not the only person from Brussels that was watched very closely today. As I mentioned, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, coming on stage just about an hour after her. And in that dialogue, we really saw a lot of attention being paid to any comments that would come up about two new member countries. Of course, Finland and Sweden currently have their applications pending for NATO membership. We expect an answer on those quite soon. He has said time and time again that he expects it to be something that is approved without ease. But of course, in recent weeks, we've seen Turkey raise their objections to these two new members joining the Union. On that, Stoltenberg said that he understands that a number of countries, be it Turkey or be it other smaller countries in other parts of the alliance, have their reservations, have their hesitations about potential economic consequences that will come with changes to the NATO alliance, notably if Russia decides to change the energy imports into these countries or raise prices prices or continue to meddle in terms of their current affairs. But he said ultimately the global security picture and the security of the military alliance is paramount, despite whatever price tag that might come with it.
We must recognize that our economic choices have consequences for our security. Freedom is more important than free trade. The protection of values is more important than profit.
And Ryan, one of the main themes of today's talks has been climate change. We had China and the United States talking on the same panel on that. What did they have to say?
Yeah, this was a highly anticipated panel because you had two countries that represent more than 50% of the global GDP. And frankly, Robin, are two countries that are key in towards of the steps we are going to take towards this green transition, talking about their progress and talking about what they are going to do. Of course, you had John Kerry, the U.S. Special Envoy on Climate, but also Xi Xianghua, the Chinese envoy on climate. The last time these two men appeared on stage together was during the COP26 conference in Glasgow in November of last year. At that time, we saw them announce a major decision on cutting back fossil fuels, something that wasn't expected but was ultimately applauded by a number of green organizations. This time around, no similar announcement, despite a lot of the pretext and expectation that something potentially could come up. But China, for their part, committed to planting 70 billion new trees over the next 2 years in order to accelerate their steps they're going to take to combat climate change.
China's forests have grown in number and in size over the past 3 decades. China holds more than a fifth of the world's green spaces. In line with the forum's tree planting initiative, China will plant 70 billion trees over the next 10 years to help green our planet, combat climate change and increase carbon capture.
Now, John Kerry has been a face that's been seen out and about in Davos. He's a regular here from the time he was actually the U.S. Secretary of State to this new role he's had for a number of years now as the U.S. Special Envoy focused on the green transition and climate change. He really pointed out to the audience that there are a number of crises that are facing business leaders, but also global politicians. Whether you look at the war in Ukraine, a looming energy crisis, skyrocketing global economic pictures, these are things that are going to preoccupy them. But he said that even though it may be easy to fall back on green commitments, whether they have been previously made or whether they are up and coming, they need to be committed to, because it can't be an excuse just to allow the fuel crisis to be the reason that many of these countries, be it in Europe, in the United States or around the world, do not accelerate or continue on the track of their green transition.
We can meet this crisis and meet the crisis of Ukraine and the energy crisis of Europe, and still deal, as we must, with the climate crisis. And no one should believe that the crisis of Ukraine is an excuse to suddenly build out the old kind of infrastructure that we had. We have to be more creative than that. We have to be much smarter than that, given the stakes.
So there you hear the U.S. Special Envoy on Climate Change, John Kerry, speaking. But, you know, ultimately, Robin, this is a business conference. Sure, you have the NGOs, sure, you have the politicians, but really this is a conference where leaders from blue chip companies or leaders of those S&P Fortune 500 companies are coming here to discuss their role in the global transition, be it towards climate change or really just creating a better role. And so climate change, of course, is top of mind. When we spoke to the World Economic Forum president on Sunday, he expected that a number of big blue chip companies would announce their net zero transition by 2050 while they are on the ground here in Davos. We have yet to hear too many of these announcements, but we did hear from Tencent, one of Tencent's executives, that is a major Chinese company, talking about the role that companies need to be taking in the ecological transition. And he really talked about time being something key here, something that really is the first step in order to taking the actions, because though you can plan for it, the faster you are able to actually get this done, it will make a bigger impact and enact really more meaningful change. Take a listen to our interview.
The absolutely biggest challenge is the urgency in itself. So when you hear something about climate change being a challenge, I feel that the first generation of discussion about climate change focused on ideas that suggested that we would be feeling the impacts of climate change many years into the future. As the world's learned more about climate change, is that at the same time it's set an expectation this is far off. And what we don't really have is a sufficient mindset that we actually need to move right now, that we're in the middle of this climate emergency. And if you have this mindset to think that way, and you look at the stories, the news stories coming out every day, you're going to find around the world there's so many challenges that are seeming to happen at the same time. I think the challenge is resetting the mindset of humanity to act urgently and to use tools that we weren't accustomed to using in a normal circumstance.
So, Robin, you hear David Wallerstein there talking about acting urgently, but we still have really not seen those big, bold commitments that are sometimes so notable here at the World Economic Forum, where countries or businesses say that they are going to do things that were frankly unexpected. Of course, there is still 2 more days of this conference to go, and so anything could happen in terms of making big steps towards the ecological transition.
Ryan, we will no doubt speak again tomorrow. For now, Ryan Thompson in Davos, thank you.
Well, earlier I spoke to Simon Freakley, who's the CEO of Alex Partners, and I asked him about the impact the war in Ukraine is having on global trade.
This is just the next major disruption. I mean, the first thing to say, of course, this is a humanitarian tragedy, but a profound disruption fast on the heels of COVID-19, which, of course, we thought was the major disruption in our lifetime. So companies are having to adapt. Clearly, there's now real supply chain problems compounding the ones that we've been living with for the last 2 years. So people are developing regional and local supply chain solutions, not just global solutions, which are now not so possible. So it's just in case now, as well as just in time.
For decades, global growth has been pretty strong. Now, of course, we've got inflation, we've got high interest rates, we've got geopolitical tension not seen for many decades. How has that business backdrop altered?
Well, I think that it's more complicated. I think it's too soon to declare the end of globalization. I think there's a multi-year period ahead of us of profound uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty in Europe and the affiliations that come on the back of that. But what we're seeing today is that businesses are dealing with extraordinary hikes in commodity prices and energy prices. That, of course, is being passed on to the customer. That's putting real recessionary pressures on Western economies. And so I think we're in for quite a turbulent time over the next few years. Difficult to tell at the moment whether that will formally take us into a recessionary period, but that's very possible. Business leaders are having to be agile. They're having to make sure that they have plans in place to pivot their businesses as they have to seek different sources of supply for critical products. Labour shortages, of course, are still very much a feature of many industries, and so quite a challenging time for businesses as well as for governments.
You've been advising businesses of all shapes and sizes for many, many years. So what are they telling you? Are they saying, look, we're having to bring our production closer to consumers because of the supply chain squeeze? You say they need to be agile. Is nimble going to be the buzzword of 2022 and beyond?
Well, at Alex Partners, of course, we're advising clients all the time how to, first of all, protect themselves against the threat of these disruptions, but also to capitalise on some of the opportunities. We've talked about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. That's a profound disruption and a human tragedy. But, of course, there are many other disruptions playing out simultaneously. We're not out of COVID-19 yet. New technologies are fundamentally upending many industries. We're seeing the effect of climate change, etc., etc. So it's the way in which these disruptive forces are compounding against each other, turning a rolling sea into a choppy sea, that's making it tough for people to do long-term planning. So we say to our clients, make sure that as much of your cost base as possible is variable, so you can change quickly on the back of circumstances. Make sure you're never a hostage to single sources of supply, hence the need to have local, regional, as well as global supply chains, and to make sure that strategies are implemented deliberately and quickly. So do it nearly right, but do it now. So pace over perfection is what the best leaders are doing.
Pace over perfection, that's certainly one to take through Davos and beyond. Simon Freakley, always an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
There are fears that the United Kingdom economy could slip into a recession later this year, with new data showing a major slowdown in business activity. The pound fell to its lowest level in more than a week against the euro after the monthly Purchasing Managers' Index fell almost 6 points. The PMI measures the performance of the service and manufacturing industries. The International Energy Agency is warning that the cost of electric car batteries could surge 15% if metal prices remain high. The group says supply disruption caused by the war in Ukraine is adding to the already high costs of crucial materials like nickel and cobalt. The IEA says the rise in prices is the biggest obstacle to drivers switching to electric vehicles. Airbnb is to close its business in China from the end of July. The online marketplace, which allows people to rent out their homes, will remove around 150,000 listings in the country, where ongoing COVID restrictions have severely curtailed tourism. Bookings within China make up around 1% of the company's global revenue.
Still to come on CGTN. With the war now 3 months old, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says a bloodbath is underway in the east of the country.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. And do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Russian forces have launched an all-out assault aimed at cutting off 2 key Ukrainian cities in the east of the country. Severodonetsk and Lysychansk lie on the opposite sides of the Donets River.
Reports suggest they're now close to being fully encircled by Russian-backed troops. With the war now 3 months old, President Volodymyr Zelensky says a bloodbath is underway in the region. Well, let's talk to Associated Press reporter Kieran McQuillan in Lviv. Kieran, what is the latest that you're hearing from the Donbass region?
Well, the very, very latest that we're hearing is that the city of Lyman is now under severe Russian bombardment. It's just south of Izium, the city that they took, the Russians, in April. And further to the south, around Popasna, Russian forces are also moving north. That means, according to the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom on their Twitter update this morning, that those Russian forces are within 25 kilometers of each other. And they're trying to link up and trying to surround these cities that you mentioned, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, both of which are also under heavy bombardment at the moment. Now, the Russians are they have this bite and hold tactic that they're employing in the Donbass at the moment. It's to take little chunks of land and to hold on to it. And they're doing this village by village as they start to encroach upon this territory. Now, it's really crucial that Sloviansk and Kramatorsk are the two essential cities that are required to be taken to actually have the whole area of the Donbass under control. Now, going back to Severodonetsk, the governor there, he said that he delivered a grim warning that it might be too late for the thousands of civilians to be evacuated from that besieged city. 15,000 people are in shelters there. And the Ukrainian army does face a bit of a dilemma now. The bridge is blown between that and Lysychansk on the other side of the bank of that of the river Severodonetsk. They have to decide whether or not they retreat now and whether or not they stay and fight. This is the dilemma for them.
And Kieran, it's now been 3 months since the start of this war. Give us a sense of where we are at this point.
Well, we have to look at this economically, politically and militarily. Now, first militarily, the Ukrainians believe that they have the upper hand, as it were, militarily, despite these setbacks that they're now facing in the Donbass region. This is now a war of artillery. The Russians have a lot of it. They have not enough manpower. And what the Ukrainians are waiting for these heavy arms to come in from the west and to go to the front lines, and so that they can also get the training. So they're trying to buy a little bit of time, keep the Russians pinned down, and so that they can get this weaponry in and then they can start a counter-offensive. That's Ukraine's plan so far. Now, economically, the GDP of this country is forecast to shrink by 45% this year. Compare that to the Russian GDP, down by 12%. The West will have to pump billions of dollars into this economy. President Zelensky did put a price tag on this at Davos. He said that it would cost $5 billion per month to keep the economy here afloat. All of this in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Negotiations with the Russians are stalled. Analysts say that the only way the Russians will get back to the table is if the counter-offensive that the Ukrainians could be planning is successful. Look, we're probably into a very long war of attrition now. You know, that has dangers for both sides, especially with the world economy as it is, and maybe the focus of the world may shift away from this area as we experience the largest land invasion in mainland Europe in about 80 years.
Kieran, thanks very much. That's Kieran McQuillan from the Associated Press in Lviv.
Russian defence chiefs say the operation in Ukraine will continue until all the Kremlin's objectives have been met. The defence minister has hinted at new humanitarian corridors to allow civilians to be evacuated from the worst affected areas. Our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow, and a reminder that journalists in Russia are working under media laws that restrict what they can report. Stuart, Russia's defence minister was speaking at a meeting of former Soviet states. What's he been saying?
Yes, this is the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. The defense ministers were meeting earlier today from Armenia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and were joined by the Russian defense minister, who spoke about where he saw the so-called special military operation in Ukraine. Now, he mentioned that he believes the pace of the operation, responding to allegations it's going more slowly than planned, is being held back, but not because of any deficiency in military might, but because Russia is insisting on opening humanitarian corridors as it goes in cities that it is so-called liberating, and also because it is emphasizing, it is trying hard to only hit civilian targets and to only hit military targets and avoid civilian infrastructure to ensure there are no civilian casualties. He said that the collective security of the members of this military bloc is being threatened by the activities in Eastern Europe, but not by Russia's actions, but by NATO's actions. That NATO ignored Russia's 2021 security proposals, which would have had some Eastern European nations had to leave the bloc of NATO, and also ban further joining from Ukraine or Georgia. And so this was why Russia's military operation had to go ahead, and he believes that there is a threat from NATO at the CSTO's western borders, such as in Poland. He also addressed the idea that Russia is always willing to give the necessary assistance, military assistance, to other CSTO countries, like we saw in Kazakhstan when Russia and other nations deployed their forces to prevent what was described as a coup d'etat by Kazakhstan.
Stuart, this conflict's been going on for 3 months now. What does the Russian public think about what's been happening in Ukraine?
Well, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov was quite blunt today when he said that the vast majority of people in Russia believe it's the right thing to do. He was responding to the resignation of a senior diplomat in Geneva who claimed that this was something that was damaging Russia's standing on the international stage and was also not good for the people of Russia. And in also saying that, he cited polling that provides information to that effect. But to be clear, such polling, sociologists warn, in a time of extreme change is difficult to believe. So most recently, the pollster that's most cited in Russia that has links to the Russian government suggests that around 70% of people support what's going on. But there are two major caveats to that. First of all, what's going on in a lot of people's minds here is very different. Some people watch news outlets that only report what the Russian government provide, and that would give a different impression to those that read other sources of news outside the country. As well as that, there are restrictions on reporting what's going on in the first place, and so that means that not all information about what's going on is presented to people here. In addition to that, not everyone is interested in what goes on outside Russia's borders, and some people cannot or fear talking about this issue with others because there are laws preventing discussion of the special military operation unless citing government officials. So it is a very murky picture, and it's clear that there is no united belief here in Russia about the operation.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you.
Hungary has extended its state of emergency laws because of the war in Ukraine.
Prime Minister Viktor Orban announced the changes via Facebook, adding his cabinet needed room to manoeuvre so it could respond to challenges quickly. Orban won a fourth consecutive term last month and has used these measures in the past over migration and later during the COVID-19 pandemic.
At least 11 people have been killed after a 10-storey building collapsed in Iran's southwestern city of Abadan. There are fears that up to 50 people could still be trapped under the rubble. Officials say 10 people, including the current and former mayors of the city, have been detained while an investigation takes place.
Thousands of mourners in Iran have attended the funeral of a senior army colonel. Hassan Syed Qadeh was shot on Sunday by two gunmen on a motorbike as he sat outside his home in Tehran. Crowds gathered in the centre of the city to pay their respects, many chanting anti-Israel slogans. No one's claimed responsibility for the attack.
Energy supplies, Ukraine and the COVID pandemic have topped the agenda as leaders of the United States, Japan, India and Australia met in Tokyo.
The four countries make up the security grouping known as the Quad. Our correspondent Phoebe Amoroso reports.
There were some concrete initiatives. One thing that has just been launched is a Maritime Initiative, and this is trying to prevent illegal fishing, and it will involve data sharing between all the members in order to allow them also to monitor their territorial waters more closely. And we also heard a commitment to continue vaccine assistance around the world. And then in attendance at the meeting was the new Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and he really highlighted climate change as a major issue. It is domestically a very hot topic in Australia, and he wants the Quad to become a leader in that field. So there were various topics under discussion, but really the key was that all four members wanted to show that they were united in the message that they were sending out. And just to add, one thing that Prime Minister Kishida said today was that all four had shared concerns over the tragic situation in Ukraine. And that was important because he also included India in that statement. And India has been not willing to criticize Russia or impose sanctions. And India has avoided making any direct statements. But the message here from the Quad was very symbolic, trying to show a united front between the four members.
Still ahead on CGTN. Could the UK Finance Minister be considering an about-turn on a windfall tax for energy companies?
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliet Mann and me, Robin Dwyer. The headlines again. Conflict on the agenda at Davos. Security and the war in Ukraine take centre stage at the World Economic Forum. And fighting intensifies in eastern Ukraine as Russia tries to cut off key cities. President Zelensky warns of a bloodbath.
The official report into lockdown rule-breaking at the heart of the UK government is expected to be released in the next 24 hours. But ahead of that, pictures have emerged of Prime Minister Boris Johnson attending several gatherings in 2020 in breach of laws imposed by his government at the time. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson has been following this story from the start. Now, Andrew, how tricky is the situation now for the Prime Minister?
Well, it carries on being tricky, but to be frank, we've had the police investigation from which we learnt very little. There was no published confirmation or conclusion from what the Met Police found, simply the information that 120 fines were issued to about 80 people. One of those was the Prime Minister with one fine. The Sue Gray report will be the first time that people actually involved in the so-called Partygate will have been able to put forward what they have to say, and that may well be published in its entirety. It may be a very, very lengthy, a very, very precise document that may come out as early as tomorrow. But really, the media have been so focused on this story for the last 5 months that much is already known and concluded by the public and by other MPs about what went on in Downing Street. So it's really a matter of going through the procedure. The report will come out. It may well condemn even further the behaviour of the leadership within Downing Street, but then there comes an inquiry by the Privileges Committee in the House of Commons as to whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament by saying that he said all rules were followed. And that won't even start considering that inquiry until at least 2 weeks' time, and it could take months. So the can is continuing to be kicked down the road. So whatever the Prime Minister faces in terms of disapproval from his own party and disapproval from the public, my guess is he'll continue to hold his position and refuse to resign when asked to, and hope to survive whatever is thrown at him over so-called Partygate.
Someone else at the heart of government whose popularity rating has been fluctuating is the UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak, the UK Finance Minister, who's been saying for some time now that he wouldn't impose a windfall tax on energy companies. But, Andrew, it looks like he could have changed his mind.
Well, look, the energy regulator has reported today, the head of Ofgem has said that energy bills are going to really go up this winter. He's talking about a massive rise in the price hike, the minimum price that energy can be charged at, and also predicting something like an increase of 120% over bills from the previous October to the October coming in 2022. That is something that even he admitted has not been seen since the 1950s in terms of pressure. They're talking about 9.5 million households in the UK going into what's called fuel poverty, which is when 10% of income or more is being spent on keeping heat and energy in the home. So the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have avoided this idea of a windfall tax, which has been pushed by the Labour Party as being a way of perhaps taking some of the huge profits that the energy companies have made in the last 12 months and taking a one-off donation to the Treasury to help them deal with the crisis. There's lots of arguments against this. The energy companies say they need that money to invest in alternative energy. We're heading for net zero 2050, so they want to keep those investment programs going. And also a one-off windfall tax isn't necessarily setting the stage for continued dealing with the crisis in years to come. So it's an aberration, if you like. However, the Chancellor now has tasked his people to look into the possibilities of this and start giving him some numbers that he can work with to come back within June next month, because the concern in Downing Street really is that the government might have to intervene, and they might, as a measure of last resort, have to go to the energy companies and take some of their profits in order to just see them through at least this winter. It's not set in stone yet, but this is the first time we've heard so far that the Treasury is considering such a measure.
Andrew Wilson, thank you.
Protesters have disrupted a meeting of shareholders at the headquarters of energy giant Shell in London.
We are unstoppable! Another world is possible! We are unstoppable! Another world is possible!
Members of the environmental action group Extinction Rebellion infiltrated the annual general meeting disguised as investors. Shareholders had been due to vote on the firm's new climate strategy. Some activists chained and glued themselves to parts of the building before being removed by police.
The head of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, says he's quietly optimistic that a landmark deal to establish a global minimum corporation tax will be approved, even though progress is well behind schedule.
The comments come as a new OECD report shows taxation on wages largely recovered last year after taking a hit during the COVID pandemic.
Ross Cullen has more from Paris.
The OECD's Secretary-General told a panel at the World Economic Forum in Davos that it was manifestly in the interest of the United States to join the global tax deal. It comes amid scepticism in some parts of Europe and the United States about the fiscal agreement signed up to by nearly 140 countries to establish a global minimum tax rate of 15% on multinational corporations. The international treaty would overturn decades of corporate tax rules and see US tech giants pay tax in the countries in which they operate and not just the countries where they are registered. Matthias Cormann admitted a lack of consensus meant that the agreed text would not likely be ready until the end of the year, pushing back the previously outlined timetable. That landmark global tax deal was signed here in the French capital, where the OECD is headquartered, and on Tuesday it published its fiscal analysis report, Taxing Wages 2022. That report shows that the total taxes paid by employers and employees, well, that's bouncing back after taxation fell in many OECD countries during the COVID-19 pandemic as governments supported households through the crisis. The report says most OECD countries saw an increase in taxes paid by the workforce in 2021. Last year, many countries withdrew or scaled back restrictive measures imposed during the pandemic, and the report says that is now having an impact on the tax paid in OECD countries. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Swedish company Volvo says it's the first truck maker in the world to introduce fossil-free steel in its vehicles. The metal is made in Sweden, and the company's heavy-duty electric trucks will be the first to be made with it. Jessica Sandström is a board member at Volvo, and she joins us now on the programme. Welcome, Jessica. So, first of all, tell us, what is fossil-free steel and where does Volvo get its hands on it?
So, as you say, this is a Swedish innovation where we collaborate with SSAB and we source our steel from that company. So basically what you do is that you exchange the coal that traditionally have been used to produce steel with hydrogen, and by that you get a CO2 neutral production.
But steel making is in itself a very energy intensive process. It generates a lot of emissions. Is this something that can ever be truly green?
Yes, and I think if we are going to be able to meet our target to be completely fossil-free, it means that we need to address all aspects of our production and also, of course, using the trucks. So we have been addressing the trucks by introducing the electric trucks, and now we take the next step where we are focusing on getting emission-free free type of materials, but also recycled materials. And if we look at steel in particular, as you say, it's quite an energy-intensive type of material, but also it emits a lot of CO2 today. And in a truck today, we get approximately 40% of the emissions coming from the production, from the steel. So it's a really important area to attack if we are going to meet the overall targets.
You have, at this stage, though, decided to only do this for your trucks, haven't you? Why not extend this to all your vehicles?
I mean, we have to start the journey somewhere, and we have decided to start with the electric trucks, since this is the focus of the emission-free world, so to say. So we will start there, and gradually, as more and more quantity will be available, but also additional qualities of steel, we will continue to introduce the steel in more and more products over time.
And let's talk a little bit about the bigger picture for your industry. We're seeing rising transportation costs, of course, supply chain problems. How is Volvo dealing with those?
Of course, we are seeing the same problems as the industry in general, and the uncertainty will continue for quite some time. But what we do know is that at the same time, we have the climate crisis, and it will continue to be there. So it's important to not lose focus on that now and continue to work towards our targets with a completely emission-free business. That means that we need to continue to innovate, but also adopt the technology as soon as it's ready, because that is really how we can lead the way and show that it's possible to transform the transport industry.
OK, Jessica Sandström from Volvo, thank you very much indeed for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Still ahead, as Spain reports a surge in monkeypox cases, scientists investigate the virus to try and prevent further transmission.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back? Or if it's even possible to measure intelligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back.
The World Health Organization is reporting 131 confirmed cases of monkeypox outside of West and Central Africa, where it's usually found.
Spain is one of the worst affected countries in Europe, with over 50 infections, mostly concentrated in the Madrid area. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak reports.
Spain once again living in the shadow of a health emergency following last week's monkeypox outbreak in Madrid. This current wave of monkeypox was first detected in the UK on May the 7th. Since then, cases have been reported all across the world. With the outbreak still in its early stages, it's vital authorities get as much accurate information on the virus as quickly as possible. And this is where microbiologist Susana Guerra comes in. Susana and her colleagues at the Autonomous University of Madrid have been studying viruses similar to monkeypox, giving them valuable insight.
Está clarísimo que no lo estamos haciendo muy bien, o sea,
It's clear we haven't approached this in the right way. Following this outbreak, we should at least develop some kind of empathy. We should worry about diseases happening in Africa because they can affect us here.
Now, the monkeypox virus is nothing new. The first human cases were detected in the Democratic Republic of Congo back in 1970, and since then there have been intermittent instances of the virus in and around that region. But this is the first time there's been a mass outbreak outside of Africa, and that has global health authorities worried. Fortunately, monkeypox isn't as contagious as some other diseases. Human-to-human transmission occurs through close contact with an infected person or their clothing. However, as COVID-19 demonstrated, viruses are constantly evolving, and there are fears this current outbreak could be a sign that it's becoming more transmissible.
Desde luego que la gente tenga mucha conciencia de...
For prevention, people need to take precautions when it comes to close contact. Some reports have mentioned sexually transmitted disease, but it's not the case. The thing is that when you have these kind of relations, you are in close contact, but you can also get it by just having close contact with someone infected.
Cualquier persona con la que tengas un contacto estrecho.
So far globally, the outbreak is relatively small, but health officials admit they don't really know how the virus is spreading, meaning the true number of infections could be far higher. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
The World Health Organization has re-elected Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus as its Director General. He steered the WHO through the entire COVID pandemic, becoming the face of the organization at regular briefings.
No one else was nominated for the position. Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger reports from Geneva.
Child of war, economist and African, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus brought a breath of fresh air to the WHO leadership and is now being rewarded with a second term. His first 5 years in office, though, have not been without controversy. After the first COVID-19 warning from China, weeks passed before the WHO reacted, and the fact that the virus spreads via droplets in the air was initially denied by the organization. Eventually, however, communication improved, and Tedros now provides the international community with near real-time updates.
It's clear that the world was and remains unprepared for a pandemic.
Despite not making much headway, the 57-year-old Ethiopian has repeatedly pointed out the low vaccination rate in Africa, which according to the WHO has led to rising infection rates in many countries on the continent. According to the Institute for Global Health at the University of Geneva, the global vaccination distribution program COVAX would have had more success if directly led by WHO Chief Tedros.
At the end of the day, it would have been better, because it would have been more inclusive. It would have really involved Russian and Chinese into this organization. And for delivering the vaccine, the Chinese proved their effectiveness. We would have had, I think, a higher coverage in low-income countries.
But it's not just pandemic politics that have troubled Tedros' past term. The former Ethiopian Minister of Health and Foreign Affairs had to overcome criticism from his own country, as well as a crisis last year following sexual abuse reports against WHO staff in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Meanwhile, his role as WHO chief will not get any easier in Tedros' second 5-year administration. Medical care continues to be lacking in war zones like Ukraine, and with monkeypox, some even fear that another pandemic is arriving.
We see today that the doubling time is about 2 days, meaning that we are maybe on the verge of a new emergence of new epidemic trends. We don't know. This is the questions WHO has to solve very quickly at an international level.
Despite initial criticism and a temporary withdrawal from the WHO of the United States, Dr. Tedros now enjoys the support of the international community, and he is giving a voice to those low-income countries that are so much in need of the organization's guidance, given the health challenges not only with infectious diseases, but also with climate change. Johannes Bleschberger, CGTN, Geneva.
Tough COVID restrictions remain in place in many parts of China, including the capital, Beijing. Rules preventing people travelling outside their own province are having a major impact on domestic tourism.
But in Chengdu, people are finding new ways to enjoy the sights and tastes of their home city. Our correspondent Guo Tianqi reports.
When it comes to Chengdu, locals and visitors alike think of delicious food and rich nightlife. So a nightly special hot pot-themed sightseeing bus is proving popular with local tourists.
On this bus, you can experience most of the Chengdu's favorite tourist hotspots. Inside, there's a chance to have some local cuisine, such as authentic, spicy hot pot. And outside, there's a stunning night view of the most famous streets in the central business district.
To satisfy the discerning taste of Chengdu locals, the hot pot served on the bus comes from a famous hot pot restaurant.
The meal is quite enough for us, and it tastes good. My son can't eat very spicy food, but he ate a lot today.
The entire route is about 10 kilometers and takes 90 minutes. The slow speed is to allow diners to take in the sights as well as for their safety.
I thought the soup would spill, but it's very steady. It's like eating on a high-speed train.
Due to the pandemic, the number of tourists from other provinces has decreased, but viewing the same night view from a different angle is still appealing to locals.
We haven't left Chengdu for a long time. In order to increase children's knowledge, I took my son to local museums every weekend. Today we just went to Wuhou Temple. Now we come here to eat on the bus and visit the night market.
During the pandemic, this novel experience can also lighten our mood.
After the hot pot theme, the sightseeing bus will also combine pubs, tea houses, and Sichuan food in the city tour in the future.
Chengdu people like delicious food and nightlife. Tourist enterprises should launch products to meet the consumption upgrading and in-depth tourism to meet the challenge and attract local tourists.
Guo Tianqi, CGTN, Chengdu, Sichuan Province.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has described the relationship between China and Germany as a super engine into which both sides should continue injecting fuel. His comments came during a video call with his German counterpart Annalena Baerbock ahead of the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two nations. China has been Germany's largest trading partner for the last 6 years, and Germany is China's largest trading partner in Europe.
An investigation into the British withdrawal from Afghanistan last August has strongly criticised the operation. The report by members of Parliament says there were systemic failures. Afghan civilians who had helped the British army were left behind. And lawmakers say the UK's global reputation has been damaged.
Turkey's president says he no longer recognises the Greek Prime Minister and has refused to meet him at a summit later this year. It follows comments by Kyriakos Mitsotakis calling on the United States to consider Turkish violations of Greek airspace when deciding future defence policy. President Erdogan says that amounts to Greece lobbying Congress to exclude Turkey from the F-16 fighter jet project.
The video hosting website TikTok is launching a new service allowing creators to make money by offering subscriptions to their fans.
Social media sites are engaged in a battle to attract top creators to draw in users, and TikTok's offering follows similar services from sites like Twitch, Twitter and YouTube.
Our digital editor Duncan Hooper joins us now. Duncan, why are TikTok doing this and why now?
Well, as you mentioned, it's part of this battle between the big social media companies. This space has traditionally been dominated by Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp. and Google, which owns YouTube. During the pandemic and the lockdowns, we saw TikTok really become a massive challenger and seriously start putting some big pressure on these companies. And of course, a lot of the markets they operate in are now quite saturated. So the only way they can really grow is by taking audience away from each other. And that's meant their traditional model, which is really a genius idea where the users both create and consume the content and all the platforms have to do is take money from advertisers, no longer works. And they have to be more and more innovative in trying to persuade and incentivize creators to produce more content on their own platforms.
So up until now, we've seen lots of platforms copying TikTok. Is this now a case where TikTok is copying them?
Yeah, it is quite ironic because as TikTok emerged as this huge global force, we did see everybody scrambling to try and emulate their features. And the one thing that TikTok does have is this really powerful algorithm that can make content go viral. And that's why this new offering is slightly different to the others that have gone before. You're right, many others have offered subscriptions, but a lot of them have said, OK, you can pay and there you'll get exclusive content from the creators. TikTok aren't saying that. They're saying everybody can see the content, but if you pay, you get additional features. The ability to chat, for instance, in the live with the creator, or the ability to get a badge next to your name, next to your profile, so people can see that you really care and you're a sign of super fan, if you like.
Let's talking about going viral. I mean, is it really possible to forge a career on social media as an influencer?
Well, there are people who've really gone from nowhere to make millions on these platforms. And there are people who were intensely rich already who've made millions more. So yes, it is, Juliet. But if you're thinking of doing it, obviously what you need to do first is to build up a really big audience and get that audience engaged so the algorithm's going to show your content to more and more people. Once you've done that, you have a few options to monetize. You know, firstly, the traditional method, even before any of these options were available, people used to sell stuff to that audience. So vitamin pills, for instance, built entire YouTube empires. And nowadays, it's more likely to be a branded hoodie or a mug. Other options, you can get an advertising share if you're producing very large contents of video. You can get gifts given to you, virtual gifts that you can exchange for cash. Of course, the platforms take a cut. You can have subscriptions. That's a more stable model because even with a small number of fans paying you regularly, you know what you're going to get in. But the big one for most creators is partnerships and sponsorships. And there you can get anything from a couple of $100s per post, or if you're one of the real superstars, footballer Ronaldo, singer Beyonce, you can earn $1 million just for a single post. So yeah, absolutely, this can be completely lucrative. But for most of us, Julia, it's never going to be enough that we can give up our day jobs, unfortunately.
Hang on, Robin, come on, let's keep taking notes.
So I say stand by for Juliet going viral on TikTok.
Thank you very much. And finally, billions over budget and many years late, hundreds of people have queued in the rain to be among the first to ride London's newest train line, the Elizabeth line, named after the UK's Queen. It's designed to connect East and West London and will boost the capital's rail capacity by 10%. There was something of a party atmosphere as the line finally opened after 12 years of construction. The 100-kilometre route with 25 kilometres of tunnels is expected to cut cross-city journey times considerably. Some newspapers said it was fit for a queen.
And you can see a full pictorial history of the London Underground on our website. From its humble roots linking Paddington Station to Farringdon in the east over 140 years ago to the sprawling modern network of today with its many lines and interchanges. You can log on to europe.cgtn.com for more. And do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
The headlines again. Conflicts on the agenda at Davos, with security and the war in Ukraine taking centre stage at the World Economic Forum.
Fighting intensifies in eastern Ukraine as Russia tries to cut off key cities. President Zelensky warns of a bloodbath.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is accused of lying again over a lockdown gathering in Downing Street for which he wasn't fined.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.